Changing a Doctor of Philosophy into a Scholarly Monograph, a podcast by Steve Redhead and Tara Brabazon. Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Professor of Cultural Studies and the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University. And this podcast comes from a request, not from a PhD student at Flinders University, but a dear friend of mine and a dear friend of Steve Redhead's, the lovely Jess Richards, or should I say Dr. Jess Richards, who's currently based at the University of Sydney. And Jess, we adore you. We've loved all the engagements we've had with you in the last 3 or 4 years. Yes, we've known you that long, and your success is incredibly important to us because we think the work you're doing as a woman in sport, as a woman in fandom, as a woman in media studies, cultural studies and leisure studies is incredibly important. And you sent us a very interesting request, message and question on Twitter that we're going to address for you now. And your question was, how do I change this PhD, this great PhD that did incredibly well through the process, so I hear, Jess, did incredibly well. How do we transform that great PhD into a great book, a great scholarly monograph, which will provide the foundation for your career? And Jess, that is a really great question. It's a really important area. And you're right to ask that question because publishing is changing radically and rapidly. And I cannot overstate this. The changes to publishing as an industry, a creative industry, in the last 2 years, let alone the last 5 or 10 years, is stellar and startling. So if anybody is offering you dated advice, and you being a generic you, dated advice about when I wrote a book in 2007, like that has relevance now, I would really be wary. So Steve and I, Steve Redhead, Professor of Cultural Studies at Flinders University, and another great mate of Jess's, we're going to together talk about how to transform a PhD into a scholarly monograph, being very aware of the transformations of internationalisation, digitisation, disintermediation and deterritorialisation, and the impact of those tendencies on academic publishing. So, hi Steve.
Hi Tara.
Do you want to do a big hello to Jess?
Hello Jess.
She's amazing. So the first question I've got that we might talk through, Steve, is the relationship between a PhD and publishing. So let's just talk about that generically. So how do scholars select, right, well, I'm going to move my PhD into refereed articles or perhaps professional publications, which is a big area, I would imagine, for law, for education, also some leisure studies as well, but also book chapters. How do you decide, right, it's a book chapter or it's conference proceedings, or indeed, how do you say this is a book? How do we make those decisions about the portfolio of options for research dissemination?
Yes, I think they're good questions because they're the ones that are facing people who have done a PhD, particularly those who now want to go into an academic career, and Jess is one of those. At the moment, I'm going to become part of a editorial board of a book series that Emerald are doing. They're going to come online and fairly soon, which is called Deviant Leisure. And that particular series is already starting to look at possible books based on PhDs. So that's interesting in itself, that currently that is the sort of thing that is happening. And there's a recognition that students have produced, PhD students have produced a major tome,
yes,
in some cases, just a great example, which is going to make not just an original contribution to knowledge as a PhD, but an original contribution, I would argue, to the field.
Yes.
And I think then, if you can make that sort of claim, you can tweak and transform that PhD into a book monograph.
Yes. Now, you've said, I was going to say, you said two great things there. Firstly, you've said there is a market for a PhD as a book.
Yes.
Now, you and I, we need to be really honest here. You and I, our PhDs did not become books because 10 years ago, they actually had on publishers' websites, don't send us PhDs. We're not interested in publishing PhDs. Your PhD wasn't published. My PhD wasn't published. Mine became 13, 14 refereed articles, but it was not a book. But the second crucial statement you've made there is, when you're an early career academic, your name is not yet well known.
No.
So when you and I approach publishers, They know our career, they know who we are, and we get one-off deals from publishers because they know we can sell a certain number of books to cover costs. If you're an early career researcher, get into a book series.
Yes.
Get into a book series, and therefore it's safe because libraries often buy the entire series, so you're protected in terms of commerce, in terms of paying your bills, but also the editors can guide you through the publishing process. So I just want to stop you there. So Jess, this is a great suggestion, and indeed the book series that Steve is working with two of your colleagues in Deviant Leisure, aren't you?
That's right, at Plymouth University.
This is a great option for you to consider, I think. So again, Steve, use the networks because a lot of the senior academics are in charge of book series.
Yes.
So use that connection. Sorry, Steve, keep going.
So I think it is an important decision at this particular time. As you say, publishers changing. The idea of PhDs into books is definitely changing, and there's a lot more sympathy around for doing that. That's not to say you don't develop the PhD. I can think of recent examples of people I've talked to who, were asked to do the PhD as a book and then said, well, actually, I think I'd rather use parts of it as new work.
Yes.
So there's all sorts of possibilities. I think, as you say, it does depend to some extent on disciplines, and perhaps more professional disciplines, you're not necessarily going to get a book out of a PhD. It may be that then you start splitting up the chapters as possible articles in professional journals.
So I think health science, nursing, midwifery are great examples of that, so allied health professions. But again, I think we've also got to be careful that the notion of, the sciences don't publish books. I've just got one answer whenever anyone says that to me, the sciences don't publish books. Firstly, science is a very broad church.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And secondly, I wonder therefore what Springer Nature does in their book series.
Exactly.
There are hundreds of books that Springer Nature are making a fortune out of that actually are PhD students, publications, edited collections from conferences and so forth. So it's not about doing either or, one or the other.
No, it isn't.
It's about doing everything, but ensuring that your name starts to get known in particular fields.
Yes, that's right.
And the one advantage of a book is a book can never be taken off you. When you and I are introduced in keynote speeches around the world, it's, Tara Brabazon, the writer of 17 books, Steve Redhead, the writer of 17 books, whatever else we've done, it starts with the books because they are the full stop in a career.
Yeah.
And then boom, microphone drop, then move to the next thing.
Yeah.
Great stuff. So, Steve, therefore, we've argued that the book matters and maybe how early career researchers can get into a book series. Therefore, how important is the book proposal?
I think that's really crucial, because the point is that it's, the work is not a PhD anymore. So you've got to treat it as a new text in that sense for a book proposal. And we've talked about that sort of thing in other podcasts, but I do think there's a template for this sort of thing. You've developed templates for this over the years, but I think you have to treat it really seriously as a book proposal, not something as an add-on to a degree that you did.
Yes, I think that's a great point. And just for people listening to the podcast, I actually did a vlog, one of the vlogs I do at Flinders University that's on both a YouTube channel of the Office of Graduate Research, but also my personal Tara Brabazon's YouTube channel, which is called The Book Proposal.
Yeah.
And we go through the headings and what goes under the headings. Yeah. And Steve, you and I also did a book series, how to write a book series.
Yes, we did,
earlier podcasts,
which were podcasts. Yeah.
And one of them was also on the book proposal. Yeah. So if you are interested in those headings, please find that earlier podcast and vlog work, or indeed just send me an email and I'll send you the template. Yeah. But the reason there's a template, Steve, and I'll push you on this, is that this is a commercial piece of writing. This is marketing. This is branding. So you're writing 5 or 6 pages to explain to a publisher how you are going to make them money.
Yeah.
So all the airs and graces about original contribution to knowledge, this is Stella, look at me, look at me, look at me, that's all great. But actually, how are you going to make the publisher money?
Yes.
And did you want to just quietly go into, you've been doing great work with Emerald, and I've been incredibly impressed by Emerald, and a big hello to all the colleagues at Emerald, because I think this is a great publisher and I think they're doing amazing work. And you've obviously got a book coming out with Emerald. You're about a month away from finishing it. But when you did the proposal, I think for that book, it became a dialogue between you and the editor. So you wrote a proposal, and then she was very much talking with you about enhancing the proposal, which would enhance the book.
Yeah, I found that a really professional and rigorous process, and I haven't always found that in the past with other publishers. But Emerald were extremely good in the development of my book proposal. So I had provided what I thought was a really detailed, formulaic proposal, and they sent that out to readers, and as usual, and that's the process. But then I got back some very, very good and actually very positive readers' revisions, if you like, and feedback. Yes, feedback, because I then revised that proposal a couple of times to a point where, as you say, I've nearly finished the book now. That was a tremendous help to me as a writer. I found the process really helpful. I mean, there's quite a lot of critical stuff in there, which I had to take on board or be able to answer in this dialogue.
Yes.
But by the time I'd finished the actual proposal, which was accepted for the contracted book, I felt that I was a long way forward. So it had really, really helped me. And it's definitely helped me in the writing of the book.
That is fantastic. We really should say that editors do matter.
They do.
Editors have changed my life.
Yeah.
Scholarly monograph book editors. We have Nicola Young at the University of New South Wales published my first book. No one knew who I was, and she picked up that proposal out that became Tracking the Jack.
Yes.
Great editor. Knew her through 3 books. We made a lot of money. I couldn't have done anything without her. The wonderful Caroline Winterskill, who, of course, ironically, you actually had engagement with later on in your career as well.
Yes, I did.
Built my career at Ashgate. How many books did I produce at Ashgate? 3 or 4, including the University of Google. So again, Caroline picked this out as something. So great editors have great capacity to find interesting work that will sell, find new authors internationally, and then promote it, and as you found, can actually enhance the project to make it more marketable and sellable, and also a better piece of scholarship. Yeah,
very much so. And I think the editor I've been working at Emerald, Philippa Gran, has been a terrific example of what you've just said. And I think that goes also for the development of new book series, which is again what we're talking about in terms of the best PhDs being published in these series. I think you've got to take risks as publishers now, and the sub-disciplines. I mean, Deviant Leisure is a great example, which is the book series that I'm involved in at Emerald that's coming online soon. I think that area between critical criminology and leisure studies, which is really what Deviant Leisure is, I think that's a wonderful example of a field or a subfield actually being developed, and new books, which are very often going to be based on PhD work, even if it's only tangentially, they're the future. You know, the same old staid book series are not going to get us very far, especially in a sort of social media age. I really think we're past all that. I think if publishers are going to take the risks and take on new things, particularly book series, in the right areas, you're going to get people, good young authors. That's what you want.
Yeah. And also, I think the way in which, I'll use Springer as a great example. I've had some very good engagements with Springer, and I will publish with them again. And I think you, Leanne, and I will probably publish our great book on Moving On Up, about third-tier cities, probably with Springer in their city series, I think. But what I would say about Springer is they've got a very good economic model which helps all the disciplines, and that's why I think they've gone so strongly into the sciences and made it work, is that they've shown, right, well, here's a book which we can then cut up in chapters, which becomes articles that we can sell and download, and then recalibrate it and reform it into a new mode, a new book all the time. So they almost, I'm actually going to use the word, I think relatively correctly, they deconstruct a scholarly monograph and then reconstitute it in different forms. And so the Springer model is a very distinctive one, and that's why they beat all comers. They beat Routledge. They beat all the other traditional publishers that 10 years ago said, we don't publish PhDs. And they went, we'll have a go, We got some options here. We've got some models that'll make this work.
And it's global publishing.
It's global publishing. It's global publishing, and it's working. So we've just talked about digitisation a bit, Steve. And again, this is linking in, I think, with a lot of your work in Emerald. And again, you and I have had fantastic engagement with Emerald this year, really. How important is your online profile going into these conversations with publishers?
Yeah, I think that the online profile in whatever form is becoming critical. I really do. My recent engagement with publishers has been very much to do with, in traditional terms, you've published such and such, but actually what is the online profile? And I developed my website in a particular way which actually has now fitted the needs and desires of publishers.
So steveredhead.zone,
yep.
for those of you that would like
yep.
to see it.
Yep.
And so you say fits the needs of publishers. What does that mean?
It's I think you certainly have to show that you have a social media profile and a new media profile. And if you can actually develop that, so it's not something that's just static, that's going to really help the publisher, because the publisher wants to know, are you going to do vodcasts and podcasts in the course of the marketing of this book if we publish it?
Exactly.
So I think that's becoming more and more important. It's not that they just leave it to you, it's that there is an engagement between publisher and you as a social media thing.
Yeah, and what I would say, just to give an example, and we might talk about this in other fora later on, is we decided to do a series of videos. So they're not really vlogs, they're vodcasts that go on both of our YouTube channels about this book and how it was written and the publishing of it and so forth. And some of those were so successful that the publisher Emerald asked if they could cut 3 minutes out of it and then use it for their own purposes. And then it's gone on, I think, into a publishing journal about how authors and publishers can have new relationships through social media.
Yes, it has.
So that's interesting, and certainly Emerald were very, very good with you and very good with the pair of us, because I suppose they knew tens of thousands of people listen to these podcasts, just as an example, and if 1% of those buy a book,
absolutely,
we're winning, really. And if they don't, there's still a profile, they might have a chapter, they might look at it, they might have some other form of support for your work. Yeah,
so I think, any early career researcher has got to take into account these parts of the new process. They didn't have to do that in the past. I think they do now.
And even 2-3 years ago. And when we're saying the past, we mean 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, that quick.
And when I did my induction for my PhD students and my research master's students yesterday, we checked how many were on Twitter.
Yes.
Only about 1/3, 1/4 were on Twitter.
Right.
And I said, team, if you do one thing today, get on Twitter.
Yeah.
Today.
Yeah.
And I would say it's almost impossible to develop a research career and a research profile without Twitter.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and certainly it's been powerful for you.
Yeah.
Very powerful for you. So we've talked a little bit about the online profiling. What do you think is the correct tone to work with editors? Because I know that worries students, PhD students, a lot. How do they write to the editors? Are they sort of are they grovelling? Are they begging? What sort of tone are they deploying here?
No, I don't think you should be grovelling, because I think the way that both new media and social media have actually developed recently means that there is actually a reason for an author to be more confident. Yes. They can control much more, partly through the social media profile and so on. But actually, they still need a publisher.
Yeah.
But there's also it is also the case that publishers, need good, particularly young authors. I think that's the point, to innovate. So I would be confident in writing to publishers, but I think I would also make sure that what we've talked about in this podcast is all there, that the profile is there, that the social media profile is there, that you have a lot to say, as well as just the outline of a template for a book proposal. I think you need to do more than that now. Yeah. But I would say be confident. Yeah. If you're confident in the area that you're working in, not just, I'm going to publish my PhD. I think you've got to have an idea that this is an innovative developmental thing which is useful to the publisher, useful to the field.
And can I also make the obvious point? In some ways, this is a job.
Yeah.
So you are getting a job. It is a commissioned job.
Yes.
And therefore, do your homework on the publisher.
Yeah.
I think the huge mistake, and I think half of PhD students do this, they sort of randomly approach a publisher without having done the heavy lifting to look at what are their book series. Because tell you what, guys, the easiest way to get a book published is find a book series, demonstrate intellectual generosity to the editor.
Yes.
You know who the editor is. You've got respect for the publisher, particularly if a publisher like an Emerald or a Springer is revolutionising themselves into a new form, and you've actually given them the decency to say, I've done work on you, I know who you are, I know the publishing interests, and I know your book series.
Yes.
So don't just do a spruik.
No.
Don't just do a spin. Demonstrate respect, and respect by knowledge of the publisher.
Yeah.
I think that's crucial. So tell me a little bit, and you've already gone into a space that I didn't think you'd go in this podcast, actually, Steve. How does the form of the thesis change as it becomes a book? So it's hard for students because they've, engaged for 3 hard years to produce this huge PhD, this huge document. Now, where the hell do you start? You've got a PhD. What is the difference between a PhD and a book? And I know it does vary.
No, I think it can depend.
Yeah.
If you've written, 120,000 words as a PhD, you might want to knock that down, for example.
Correct.
To make it into a book to maybe 60 or 70.
That's correct.
Just for example.
60 to 70,000
That's a
words.
huge editing job.
Correct.
For you to do. But I think also that there is a difference and it may be that you don't tweak it that much and the PhD almost becomes the monograph when you change the word PhD to book. Sometimes that happens.
And can I say, in Glory's case, we've got a wonderful former PhD student, Dr. Gloria Gatswari.
Yes.
In her case, it is simply go through, replace PhD with book, thanks for playing.
Yeah, I think you can. That should be considered.
Yes.
But as I said before, I think the really important thing is what you're doing when you're going to the publisher is to show them that you should be their author, that you can do something for them.
Yep.
In an area, maybe a sub-area, and it may be innovative in that area. I think you've got to show that. So in the editing of your PhD to make it into a book, you've got to consider that.
Yeah. It's
that rather than the PhD text for examiners. Now, that's a different attitude, and it may well make it a different text.
Yeah, so remember, let's break that down a bit, Steve. That's an important point. So the audience changes.
Yes.
The audience for a PhD is 2 people or 3 people.
Who are the examiners?
Full stop. Who are the examiners? Now you've got to convince a publisher that you can have an audience in the thousands.
Yeah.
Now that will change how that book looks.
Yes.
That will change a lot how it looks and the toning and the phrasing.
Yes.
So a couple of ways you can prepare it depending on the thesis. You can have the Glory method, which is change PhD to book, thanks for playing.
And that sometimes does happen.
Sometimes it does happen depending on the topic. Can I say another strategy is, as you've said, every chapter reduces a bit and tightens.
Yes.
So in some ways you don't have to overly make the case to prove the expertise of the examiners. It will be assumed you have the expertise, so you're simply editing each chapter down.
Yeah.
That's another option. Another option I see, and it breaks my heart I'm having to suggest this, but a very easy option is you remove the literature review in the methods chapter.
Yep.
Or you certainly shorten them radically down and put them in the introduction.
Yes.
And in the old days, and in fact the overwhelming majority of PhDs that I supervise don't have a literature review chapter for that reason.
Yeah.
They embed the literature review in each of the chapters. Now I know for some people that is beyond the pale. That's actually relatively common in many fields for this reason, because if you've got embedded literature reviews, it moves much more quickly to a published book.
Yes.
Whereas if you've got this sort of laboured literature review chapter, which in some cases could be published on its own, so in some areas of the social sciences and sciences, if you've got a systematic review or a literature review, it could become a Springer brief or a Springer short.
Yes.
So in its own, that could be a small project, and I've seen that work.
Yeah, and these other publishers, Emerald, have a small book series as well.
Exactly. So that's always an option too. So you can actually take the literature review or systematic review out and publish that separately.
Yes.
And then look at what remains in the rest of the book, which might hold together much better as an argument.
Yes.
So you're not having to, this is not assessment.
No.
You're moving from assessment, which is a PhD, to an argument, for a large audience.
Yeah, very much
Are
so.
you making a convincing argument
Yeah.
rather than are you hitting the benchmarks of assessment?
That's right. And also I think you should make sure that it's absolutely up to date, and particularly in terms of literature and bibliography, because you're writing a PhD over quite a long period,
Yep.
and it may be that a lot of that literature, not so much that it's out of date, but it's been superseded
Correct.
by the time your PhD is submitted
Correct.
and you publish this book. So you've got to think of the most up-to-date literature in that book. You really have.
And if I can just use as an example for that, the Theoretical Times book that you're doing at the moment.
Yep.
So for the team that have had this slog with a PhD, moving through the maple syrup of the literature
Yep.
that you've had to do, Steve has written, how many thousand words have you written in the last 4 months?
30. The book's about 65, 70,000 words.
So, and you've written that, and you've written 30 in the last probably 3 months, really.
Yeah.
So absolutely everything's up to date. Theoretical Times has been dealing with Trump,
Yep.
has been dealing with Brexit,
That's right.
has been dealing with the alt-right.
Yep.
So literally everything's happening on a daily basis. Brand new referee literature is going into this
It
book
is,
on a
even
daily
now.
basis. So for you that are doing a PhD, you are competing in some ways with a Steve, who is an established writer working in real time at speed with the absolute contemporary literature. So team, the hint for that if you need to quickly update your work, what you do is put into Google Scholar a search for your key terms with publishing only from 2017.
Yes.
Rip that literature out and make sure there's 40 different articles or books or book chapters that are from 2017, makes it look fresh.
Yeah, because a publisher spotting that this is a PhD into a book may well say, look, you started in 2010, your literature is mainly there, and you haven't updated. So the key in a book proposal of this sort is to make it absolutely up to date.
Very, very well said. Final question, just for people considering why am I doing this? What is the value of a book for research assessment exercises internationally, of course, because we've got a huge international podcast audience, but most nations have some form of research assessment or accountability mechanism. What's the value of a book in that case? But also career development. So what can a book give you that other modalities of research dissemination cannot?
Well, I think the book is, whatever critique has been made of this, is still a very, very important part of your profile. I would say it's at the top, and don't let people say that that's not the case, and it's certainly the case for all sorts of research assessment around the world.
Yeah, it is. It is as I said, it's a full stop in your career. It is a moment. It is a statement. It puts a line in the sand for you. And certainly, if I think through my career, and I've never asked you this question, Steve, but as I look back on my career, the stages of growth and my development and my promotion through the ranks is linked with the publication of key books.
Yes.
I mean, would my career be my career without the University of Google?
No.
And the answer is no. That was on the front page of just about every newspaper in the United Kingdom. And, that allowed me to go to the next stage.
Yes.
Would I be here today if I hadn't written Digital Dieting? Again, probably not. So the books can move you to the next stage of your career that you don't even know exists until you get there.
Yeah.
And I mean, the same thing with you, Steve. Your popular cultural series... I mean, we're talking the early, mid-1990s now, really made your career, didn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And also the fact that I wrote books or edited books within that series. It wasn't just that I was a book series editor, that I actually contributed books of my own or edited books.
That's right. The final point I'll make, using Steve's career as an example, he had this incredible career and trajectory in popular cultural studies, and yet his career in the last 10, 15 years has been actually even more famous, and he's even better known because he's used books to provide a redirection and refocus of your career. So I worked here, and now I'm working in this direction. I think you've done that through books.
Yes, and I did it consciously because I saw other people doing that with books.
So the Baudrillard work, the Brilliot work, the Theoretical Times that you're doing now, you made a point, this was my career through books, so sport to leisure and music and youth. And now, you know what, team, we're moving over into this direction. Here we go. And the books documented that change.
Yes, that's right.
Fantastic. Steve, thank you for your time. Again,
Thank you.
Fascinating conversation. And Jess, as always, we wish you well. You embody really the best of what this country is and could be, and your success is very important to the future of academic life in this country. So believe in yourself, Jess, and we're always here to help you and the thousands of people around the world. I hope this has been useful to you as well. Take care.